Welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes Ministries. Thank you for listening. Janet will be talking about her struggle with addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, unwanted same-sex attraction, and living a homosexual life. Janet has survived all those things by the grace of God. Janet's not a doctor, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychotherapist, she's not a licensed counselor. Janet is an ordained pastor and wants to show you God's promises, how God has set her free, and how you can be set free. What He has done for her, He will do it for you. If healing and freedom are what you want, you have come to the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Here is Janet Boynes.
We are in the process of talking with Neil Mammen. Neil is the executive VP and co-founder of Every Black Life Matters. We got to get into that. Neil, welcome to Healing and Made Free.
Thank you very much.
Neil, you are a apologetics speaker. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we'll talk about your new book that just came out, Daily Apologetic for Kids, Volume 1. When we met at the conference, last month or 3 weeks ago, or whatever it was, what really intrigued me was the word apologetics. I had to Google it just to make sure I had an understanding of what apologetics is. But you hear so many people say, well, they are apologetic. Will you explain to the listeners or the viewers, because this will go on YouTube, what is apologetics first? Give me the definition of apologetics.
So it comes from 1 Peter 3:15, which says, always be willing to give an apologia. And they use the word apologia for the faith that you have within you, but do it with gentleness and respect. So that word apologia is where we get the word apologize from, but it doesn't really mean apologize. Apologia means defense or explanation. Mm-hmm. So defense, explanation, argument. So always be willing to give a defense or explanation or argument for the faith that you have within, but do it with gentleness and respect. So apologetics really means, that's where we get the word apologetics from. Apologetics means to provide the defense and evidence of Christianity using science, logic, philosophy, reason, history, archaeology, philosophy. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's what it is. So we prove Christianity is true using those things. And here's what's very important. No other religion has true apologetics. Islam doesn't. They have some sort of pseudo-apologetics that doesn't really work. In fact, no religion ever thought of having apologetics until we came along and said, no, if you're going to believe in something, it better be true. And so my ministry, actually my apologetics ministry, is called No Blind Faith.
So it's a Christian thing.
It really is. But you will find people saying, oh, he's a Muslim apologist or a Hindu apologist. But it really doesn't work. And now people have used it for other things. He's a apologist for networking, something like that. He's trying to promote something. But the reality is, it really is originated from apologetics. I mean, apologia has always been around. It's a Greek word. But apologetics in that form that we've been using it in English has been predominantly for Christians.
Before we start talking about why children or kids or youth need apologetics, tell me why or what made you come up with a ministry called Every Black Life Matters.
Okay, so that's the other one. So back in 2020, when, BLM and Antifa were ravaging Black communities and destroying buildings and burning down businesses, wait, if Black Lives Matter, then why are you burning down the area of town? In fact, we have video of this older Black lady saying, why did they do this? Why would they do this? Where am I going to shop? How am I going to get to work? How am I, everything was destroyed.
I saw the video.
Yeah, and it's got nothing to do with helping Black people. So we thought, so we saw all that, and then we saw some of our friends on Facebook, some Christian friends on Facebook, mm-hmm. who had gone out and were actually standing at a BLM rally, right? Holding out Black Lives Matter. So my wife turned to me and she said, they don't know that BLM is Marxist. They don't know that BLM is anti-Christian. They don't know that BLM is anti-family. So she said, you should call Kevin and tell him to start something. See, Kevin was the president of the Frederick Douglass Foundation in California. And Kevin and I and my wife, their families, we've known each other for a long time. So I said, great idea. So I called him up and I said, hey, Kevin, the Frederick Douglass Foundation needs to do something about this. They need to have an equivalent organization.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, great idea. So he goes off and like a couple of weeks later, I call him up. I said, Kev, what's going on? He goes, yeah, they've been really busy. So let me call him again. So he calls him up and then he calls him back a few days later. He says, okay, so here's the deal. They're too busy they said it's a great idea, but they're way too busy. Frederick Douglass Foundation is way too busy. And actually, they're really busy getting the vote out for Trump at the time. Right. It was 2020 in the Black community. So he said, you and I have to do it. It's the old, you go to your pastor and go, Pastor, we need a parking lot ministry. And the pastor goes, great, you're hired. Right. So that's exactly what happened. So Bishop Dean Nelson, who ran the Frederick Douglass Foundation.
Who has gone to be with the Lord.
Yeah, we went to be with a wonderful man of God. So he said, Kevin, you and Neil need to do it. So Kev calls me up and he says, okay, I guess it's you and me. And I said, hey, hang on, Kevin. I don't know if you've looked lately, but I'm not Black. And he said, oh, no. He says, no, but here's the deal, Neil. You are African American. And you see, I was born in Africa. I was born in Ghana, grew up in Ethiopia, Sudan, and of course traveled Jamaica and Yemen and other places too. But predominantly, majority of my upbringing was in Africa. So he said, so in fact, when we start this thing, you're going to be the only real African American the founder here.
I love that.
Said, so I dub you an official African American. And so we started it, and I'd done a fair amount. Having grown up in Africa, I'd done a fair amount of research on what was happening in the Black communities here. And then, of course, he grew up in the projects. He was a 100 Point Project. So we came together and we said, what are we going to call it? Well, we wanted to call it something that was very close to BLM, so close that people would confuse the two. And yet we would be able to replace them in a sense, right? Exactly. So we looked around and we thought, the options were Black Lives Matter too is really the message. It's not like Black Lives Matter over everybody else. It's Black Lives Matters too. But that was taken, and so we ended up with Every Black Life Matters, which really does help. I mean, because the minute you say it, I'm not running to anyone who said, yeah, that makes sense. Who's not said, yeah, that makes sense. They kind of get it right away.
Right.
And the beauty of that is that I can use it on liberals too. So when I'm talking to liberals, I say, well, we founded this group called Every Black Life Matters. Now, where are they going to go with that? No, they don't.
Well, I love that you came up with that. But let's get into apologetics, which I'm excited to listen to you talk about. Why do you feel that kids need to learn apologetics?
Great question. Well, real quick before I do that. So if you're interested in Every Black Life Matters, it's everyblm.com, everyblm.com. So let's talk about apologetics. So it turns out that the estimate of the number of kids who leave the faith when they get to college or when they leave home, they leave their church environment, is 75% of all kids leave the faith. 75%. So if you got 100 kids in your junior high today, 75 of them are going to leave the faith. They're not going to be Christians by the time they get to their 20s.
Wow.
Now, the reasons they give is if they go to college, their professors talk to them about the secular reasoning. They give them all these scientific explanations, how faith is not real and all that stuff. And so what happens is they then change their view. They go, well, this is all superstitious, feelings-based stuff, and they're going to change it. Now, if you talk to parents, they'll say, no, my kids have a solid foundation. When you talk to youth pastors, they'll go, no, our kids love the Lord. Yes, they love the Lord, but it's an emotional love. It's not, their mind is not engaged. It's like, I love the Lord. So once they get to college, once they get out of school, out of the church environment, those emotions are replaced with new emotions. And also, they also run into things like, well, what about homosexuality and transgenders? How come we're not How come we're so intolerant about them, right? And you know this. It's the whole argument as well. We've got to be loving to them, so therefore we have to accept it. You're the expert on that part, right of it. But how do these kids deal with it? And then what's worse is that it's not only nowadays. It's not only just kids in college. It's also if you go to a public school. If your kids go to a public school, and I would recommend if you can, whatever you can, don't let your kids go to public school. But I realize that that's not an option for parents, especially if both work. We chose that we were going to give up an income and homeschool, but not many people can do that. I mean, there are people who just can't do that. So if your kids are in public school, guess what? They're learning all about homosexuality, transgenderism in grade school. So how do we protect this? How do we stop this from happening? Well, the only way we can do that is we've got to give them the reasonable, rational, philosophically sound, scientific, archaeologically, historical. So take an example, my kids, right? They grew up in this environment. Mm-hmm. So they're getting into arguments all the time. Or they'll come back and say, look, my teacher, and now they're not public school, they're homeschooled, but we send them to an academy 2 days a week. And occasionally this teacher will say something that's wrong. And they'll say, the teacher said this. And then they get into arguments with the teacher, which I don't always recommend, but it's good. It's good for them. But why? Because they've heard it, they've learned it. And even kids as young as 5 or 6 are able to take this information and say, no, here's the reasoning. And if the teacher wants to argue mom, like go talk to mom or dad.
Yeah.
So here's the second point of that. The only people who can influence your kids more than schools, right, is going to be mom and dad. Because you can send your kids to church every time the church is open, and the church only has a 17% influence on your kids, right? Their peers, their school, their teachers have a 23%. The only people who can change that dynamic of 75% of the kids leaving the faith is mom and dad. Mom and dad has about 53% influence on the kids, according statistically. And if they don't influence them biblically, then it's not going to make a difference. But they have to influence them apologetically, not, I want you to have an emotional relationship with Christ. That's critical, yes. But if that's all it is, as I tell my kids, and I teach teenagers, I go, you can fall in love with the wrong person.
Exactly.
You can fall in love with that drug dealer, the jerk, whatever. You can fall in love. Emotions are not enough. It's got to have a foundation of facts, solid fact. Is the guy a drug dealer? No. Is the guy faithful? Does he treat his mother nicely? Does he treat his friends nicely? Look at that solid foundation before you decide to fall in love with someone. In the same way, you can fall in love with the wrong person, or you can fall in love with a person, but if somebody else comes along, more attractive, you're going to go to them. Mom and dad are critical in this role to teach kids apologetics.
Neil, yes, I totally agree. Even though I'm not a parent, mom and dads play a big role. But I think you know this because of you working with young adults and kids, that parents don't always have the knowledge and understanding of how to teach their kids apologetics because they don't know. They go to church on a regular basis. Doesn't mean they read their Bibles, but some of them don't even know how to teach their kids, and they depend on the church to do the work. Even though I agree with you, parents are to teach their children, just like homosexuality. I tell parents, look, you need to know what's going on in your school. What's in the how many books in the library on homosexuality?
Yeah, and how
answer to that question,
right.
The Muslims back in 2019, I think they took all 600 kids out of the school district because they were teaching on homosexuality, and they wind up changing the curriculum forever at that school because parents, if you're listening to this and you're listening to Neil Mammen about apologetics, you take your kids out of school, the school doesn't get paid. So you have complete control as you do with your children. Neil, why can't the church, because parents aren't getting all the information they need, they don't always understand apologetics or what they're supposed to teach their kids, why can't the church teach the kids apologetics?
Because they just don't have them long enough. If you think about it, the schools have them for 6 hours a day, right? The church maybe has them for 1 or 2 hours a week if they're lucky. And half of that time, if they're younger kids, is spent playing games or doing some craft or art or something, which does nothing to bring them closer to being able to argue, defending the faith. Now, 1 Peter 3:15. It doesn't get them to that point. So, and here's the other thing I tell people. So look, mom and dad, let's say your child had a disease,
Right.
and 75% of all the kids who had that disease died. If your child had that disease, would you send them off to the hospital and say, okay, doctors, I trust you, you take care of them. I'll just come visit now and then and see how it's going? No, you would become an expert in that disease. You would go on the internet, you'd study, you'd talk to all doctors, you'd find every single different alternative cure possible. And you go, I want to understand, why is this working? Why is this not working? You're going to be so much of an expert on the cures and the causes and every single thing. And then you're going to start working with your kid on that and saying, let's start doing this, let's start doing that. Well, folks, mom, dad, your kids have a disease. What are you going to do about it?
I'm going to use that. I never use that analogy with parents that are dealing with homosexuality, instead of saying to them, like you said, you know what, if you get cancer, you're going to do a whole study on that. You know, if your child, you know, breaks a leg and you're not sure what's going on and how can you help them, you're going to do a whole study. You can do a study on this. I love that. So with this being said, how do we protect our kids from abandoning their faith? I mean, you said 75% of our kids walk away from their faith, which is true. I've heard it was a very high percentage. How do we stop that, and how do we help them so they don't walk away? Are they not getting what they need? Are they bored with church, or they feel like church is not interesting enough? What do you think it is, Neil?
So there are two things that we recommend. The first thing, so my ministry is no blind faith, so noblindfaith.com. So the first thing we say is that parents, you got to create a culture of apologetics in the home. Mm-hmm. You've got to become the expert. You've got to start creating that culture of apologetics. So when kids ask you questions that you don't know the answer to, you say, okay, I don't know the answer, but I am going to find the answer and I am going to get back to you. Kids ask, you know, how come, whatever this, you know, why, you know, why my friend is gay? Why is that wrong? Why does the Bible condemn it? And does that mean I'm supposed to stone him? Well, mom and dad's like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, no, you're not supposed to stone him. Well, but go find the answer. Go online, research it, find out what the Bible says about it, and then find out what science says about it. Because there are two parts of this. And this is what we call, all God's laws are based on protecting us. And they're based on the natural law, the laws of nature, and nature's God, right? The laws of nature's God. So basically, when God says homosexuality is bad, there's going to be a scientific reason for it. Now, don't go to what everybody else says. So you want to give your kids those scientific reasons. So it's not like, well, God says it's wrong. Well, it's wrong. Well, that's, yeah. But you have to go, why did God say it's wrong?
Right.
And the why is so important, because when you get to college, if you know the why, and the why is solid, not based on something that somebody said, but something that you did research on, that why is the kids are going to go, hey, you know, you're not going to fool me. I've done that research. My mom has done the research. We know the research. I've seen the research. So that's the kind of idea you want, whatever it is. It could be the tough, you know, my kids we have these, they always ask the tough questions. Well, why was it okay for God to tell the Israelites to kill all the people in Jericho? You know, you got to have an answer for that. You got to be able to answer that, right? So we want you to go do the research. And you know, 50 years ago, it may not have been a problem. But today, I mean, it may have been a problem if you get those tough questions, because you got to go find the book, got to go to the library. Today, you just go on the internet and Google it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so easy. And you'll find a bunch of answers. You'll find a bunch of wrong answers and a bunch of right answers. And you can read them both. And you got to get the wrong answers too. And so one of the things I teach my kids is, look, when you say this, your friend or your professor is going to say this. And this is how you respond. And this is what you do. And then when you get stuck, don't say, well, that's the end. I don't know the answer. You go and do research yourself, and you teach them to do research. And so that's what you're doing. You're building a culture of apologetics. The next thing we do, obviously, is we recommend our book. The book is, you know, Daily Apologetics for Kids. It's going to take the kids through all these issues. It's once a day so the first volume is for 20 days. It's basically every day except for Saturday and Sunday. You take a break. And it's like a 10, 15-minute thing, but it's different from most daily devotionals. Most daily devotionals go like this. You read the passage, and then there are questions. And you ask the kids the questions, and the kids say, oh, I know the answer because you just told me the answer. So they're just blindly repeating what you just told them. We're not doing it that way. Right. We give them like a quick intro, like it'll be a story about someone who asked a tough question. And then we stop and we say, like for instance, somebody will say, why do you think Jesus isn't the only way? And like in the story, there'll be a story for the kids, and I'll say, Ashwari said, well, why do you think Jesus is the only way? Isn't that closed-minded? Do you think all of us are going to hell? This is a real question. And then we stop.
Right.
And then the question is for the kids. Well, what do you think? How do you answer that question? And the kids go, I don't know. Well, think about it. What do you think? And you start this dialogue with the kid, and their mind is churning. But what about this? What about this? And often they'll give you the wrong answer, which is good. We want the wrong answer, because how do you reveal the truth without revealing the lie, right? You got to know them. They've got to know the lie too. So they come up with the wrong answer, and then you read the rest of the question, which sort of answers it. And then you ask the question again. And now they're like, okay, I thought it was this, but this explained that it was actually this. And you see that thinking process, and kids are like, oh, I see the answer.
I love what you're doing, Neil. And those of you that are listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes, I'm talking with Neil Mammen, who teaches children about apologetics. And also right now, the listeners, those of you that are listening, if you have friends that have children, you need to listen to this. You need to share this, because we're going to get into why is homosexuality and transgenderism in his book on apologetics, and why is he teaching it to 6 through 11-year-old? This is so important because, Neil, I get this question: how old should a child be to talk about homosexuality? I say, you know what? When they can start talking back to you, it's time to start talking to them about it. Because today, correct me if I'm wrong, children are much smarter today than they were back in our era, or even 5 years ago. But I want you to talk about, why is it so important to teach our kids apologetics on transgenderism, homosexuality, at the age that you do, from 6 to 11 years old?
So the main reason is, like, look, if your kid is protected, so let's say you say, well, my kids don't go to public school. That's fine. Does your kids watch anything? If you've limited your kids to only the media that they have, and you go to a church that only has Christians, then maybe they'll never be exposed to this until an older age. And in the old days, nobody even thought about this until they hit puberty, right? But now, here's what's happening. 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds are seeing this. Disney is having shows about My Two Moms, and they have school. I mean, again, public schools, obviously, they're teaching this in first grade. So
they're transitioning at the age of 6.
Exactly, right? So, but I'm thinking, look, I'm a homeschool mom. These kids are protected. They're getting it. They go outside. You're walking on a flight. You're walking on a flight down the jetway, and you look and you see that there's a homosexual couple enjoying their flight, not on the flight, but there's a picture of them that the airline has posted as you walk down the jetway. Why? Because they want to say, hey, we're exclusive. You see an ad on TV, and there's a homosexual family, or there's a transgender man, or whatever. Pick your thing. The kids are going to be exposed to it. You can't protect your kids forever. So when do you teach them? You teach them, and there are ways to teach. Like, for instance, you can talk about homosexuality and transgenderism without getting into sex.
Exactly.
You can talk about marriage. Kids understand marriage. You can understand, and kids know a boy from a girl, and they know that at 3 or 4, right? They know the difference. So
we use animals too, a male, female animal.
Yeah. They understand the concept, right? So they're going to be exposed. So the way we do it is we introduce it. We do it. It's all age appropriate, because this is for the underage age of 11. We don't get into the sexuality of it, but we talk about gender roles. We talk about what. But here's what we talk about. And in the book, this is in later volumes, because this is a whole year thing, and the first volume just covers the first 20 days. But in the later volumes, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the chromosomal differences, and we're going to talk about how, because like one of the kids is going to say, I'm transgender, and but what's your DNA? Well, the discussion will be, what's your DNA? How's your DNA different from a male DNA or a female DNA? So we can talk about that at an early age, teach kids about that. But here's the next thing: is there are DNA defects, there are errors, there are people who are born hermaphrodite. Well, kids, if they don't know that, and somebody says, there really are transgender people because they have mixed DNA. And the kids need to know that. Well, guess what? It's like 0.002% of the population, And doctors know what kind they are, and they just have to do surgery to fix them to match their DNA. But the transgender movement has nothing to do with that. The transgender movement today is, this is your DNA. We want you to have physical characteristics of a different DNA that is not even connected to yours, that is not even related to yours. Right. And kids need to know this is the lie. Now, here's the other thing that the kids will learn. Did you know that for every transgender kid that transitions, the hospital here in Idaho, the hospital, and every state, in fact, especially more so in California, makes up to $400,000 per child that transitions.
Don't you
and now you see why they're doing this.
Money? Don't you think that's good, more for the money? Or do they really care about this child? Because they don't even tell the child what the defects or some of the things that can happen to their body. Like Laura, who will be speaking at my conference, she transitioned. She had all her female organs taken out. Nobody told her that she was going to be as sick as she is today because she don't have all her female organs, or all the problems that she's having, or the depression to a point where she don't even want to live anymore because she had a child at a very early age in her life. She can't even have kids now.
And worse, she can't get off it.
Yep.
She has to have these hormones now because the organs that produce those hormones have been removed. And so she can't reverse it. She can't go back. She can't get off it. She's stuck for life as an addict. She is their slave, if you will, for life, money-wise. I mean, it's just horrendous. Now, we will tone it down a bit for the kids, but the kids need to understand what is happening, and in a very gentle way. Of course, mom and dad will get the books. They can read it. They can skip passages if they feel, oh, my kid's not ready for that, or my kid doesn't need that. We perfectly understand that. But we do recommend that you expose your kids to these issues, because if you don't tell them, I have to tell you a funny story. Years ago, my wife was a public school teacher. Once we had our first child, she became a homeschool teacher. But we were at one of the parties with all the other public school teachers, and there was a teacher, a gal there, really nice, and she said something to the effect. She said, "Well, we didn't want to force our morals on our kids, so we're letting them develop their own sense of morality and all that." Wow. And I look, and this is the time, I don't know if you were old enough, you remember MTV had all these shows on MTV about family, not couples, but people living together in a house and having all these adventures and stuff. And the morality they were teaching on that was horrible. So I said, well, then I said, well, I guess either you or MTV. Her face, she was like, when she realized, look, if you're not teaching her morals, MTV will teach her morals. And today, it's like,
I don't have a problem with it either.
Yeah, if you're not, and the good thing is that she did have a problem with that, but she was like, I was like, I didn't say that. What were you thinking? If you don't teach her morals, who is going to? Somebody else is. And you don't want that somebody else to.
I'm glad you said that, because I tell parents, if not you, then who?
Yeah.
Don't share it with them what they need to know. Somebody else is going to share it, and not the way you would like them to get the information. Yeah. So sit down and share it with your children so they can hear from you and how you feel. That's what a lot of people say about churches. Why aren't they talking about transgenderism or homosexuality? I assume that they are inclusive, but we know that they're afraid. And I say to pastors all over the country, if you're afraid to talk about homosexuality or transgenderism, get off the pulpit. You don't need to be on the pulpit. Just get off the pulpit and let somebody else preach. Because in this day and age, children, parents need to know about what's going on in this world today regarding that particular topic. But in your book that came out, The Daily Apologetics for Kids, you go into so many different things. You're teaching on socialism and critical race theory. Why do kids need to learn all these things? And do they comprehend?
Well, so the reality is also critical race theory. Again, if you're in public schools, you're going to get critical race theory. Socialism, actually, here's what's really fascinating about socialism. So just so everybody knows, none of this was unplanned. If you go back to the 50s and you look at the list of the things that the Marxists wanted to do, and I should preface this by saying, I come from a Marxist family. My father was a communist and an atheist until I was 5. My half my cousins were Marxists and communists. My cousins, two of my uncles were very famous Marxists and leaders in the Marxist movement in India. So I was steeped in all this stuff. So socialism is rampant everywhere. Now, but in the 1950s, in fact, early in the 50s, even in the 30s, they decided that the only way to bring communism to America, because they tried a communist experiment and it failed. And they realized they thought that the reason it failed was because they didn't realize it failed because of man's sin nature, but they thought the reason it failed is because Americans are too independent. We need to create America, a society that can be controlled so communism can be successful. And so what they did is they changed all the schooling to now being to create you as a worker, not as an entrepreneur, not as a person who wants to grow and do whatever you want, but as a worker for a factory. And part of that is they were training you in socialism. So all the curriculum, John Dewey and all those guys, they started focusing on teaching you Marxism and socialism in the schools. So all the public schools have Marxism and socialism. Any American who went to a public school, even if you're a Christian, you've been indoctrinated with Marxism, socialism. And let me give you one first example. I go out and I ask people, I say, do you have constitutional rights? And everybody goes, yes. And they all raise their hands. I said, no, you don't have constitutional rights. And they're like, oh, you mean they got taken away from me? I said, no, you never had constitutional rights because the Constitution doesn't give you any rights. Your rights come from God. The Constitution is a list of negative rights. It tells you what the government cannot do. But over and over again, you've been taught that you have constitutional rights. No, you have God-given rights, and nobody can take them away. The Constitution is there to protect those God-given rights. Right there, we see that people misunderstand what rights are. And then they don't know what the difference is in rights and goods. They think that, oh, well, welfare should come from the government. No, the Bible never says that. The Bible says welfare has to come from the church and not the government. You can't force somebody to take care of other people. It has to be voluntarily. And you go through all this and you see that this is ingrained. Now, I was blessed because I came from communism, but I never went through the American school system. I came here when I was 18 to go to college, right? So I wasn't indoctrinated in that, but at the same time, I was surrounded by it. So it's an interesting dilemma. So when I started looking at it, I'm like, wait. And I was a socialist in many ways, but I hadn't been indoctrinated. I was just socialist because I thought that was the way life's supposed to be. So what's happening is where kids are being brainwashed, especially in the public school, but also you parents who went to public schools have been brainwashed into socialism. So how do we get this thing out of people? How do we teach kids that socialism doesn't work, that the free market is the only thing that works, and then people go, well, what about crony capitalism? Crony capitalism is not capitalism; it's socialism. It's actually fascism, and there's all these things that kids well, Neil, how can you teach this to 6-year-olds? Because I taught it to my 6-year-old. Exactly. And they grabbed it. In fact, it was really funny because I remember I came out of my bedroom. And my youngest child, I think she was 5, and was screaming and crying. And I said, what happened? She goes, sister called me a socialist. What? So I turned to her older sister, who's like 4 years old. I said, did you call her? She goes, yeah, I called her a socialist. Why did you call her a socialist? Because she wanted me to do the work for her, and she wasn't willing to do it for herself.
Hey, you trained them well. You trained them. Those who listen to Healing You Made Free, we're talking with Neil Mammen, who is the executive VP and co-founder, one of Every Black Life Matters. And he has a new book out. Is it a book or just a daily devotional on apologetics?
It's a first volume of the daily devotional. So, I mean, it's the first volume of 12. So it's the volume 1, and that takes you through a month, and then you'll have volume 2 and then volume 3. And so we're coming out with volume 2 in about a week or 2.
We're going to talk about how they can get that book. But how do how do you teach kids apologetics in these books? And how different is it from other apologetic books? What's different from yours than somebody else's?
So ours is a lot of books, and I have to first say, we have not found any apologetics for kids, to tell the truth. I'm sure they're out there, but I've done research on it, couldn't find any. Because, I'm the first one to buy these things and give it to my kids. I'm like, here, let's do this, right? And I couldn't find. There were some, there are some out there, but none of them went in the format where the kids were forced to think. Mm-hmm. as I said, most of them were, here's here's how you should think. Now we'll ask you some questions.
Right.
And years ago, I teach a Bible study, and my Bible study is the reverse of most Bible studies. Most Bible studies, there's a teaching time and then a question time where you discuss it amongst yourself. Mine is the opposite. There's a discussion time and then there's a teaching time. And the reason that I came up with that is because I realized that if you didn't, and this is very good with junior high and high school, because they're not interested in the topic when you speak about it. But if you start asking them questions about the topic before, they're like, I don't know the answer to that. Or they're happy to opine on what they think is the answer. And then now that they've opined on what they think is the answer, and they get the correct answer. And now remember, the way I'm teaching, I'm not teaching, this is what the Lord says, this is what you should think. I'm thinking, here's the science, boom, boom, boom. Oh, by the way, this is what God says. And isn't it amazing how the science follows God's teachings, right? So now going, scientifically it's here, God's word has, and I teach kids, I say, there's two ways to learn the law. One is the revealed law, and one is the discovered law. The revealed law is always the best one. It's like, and the example I say is, look, don't run across the street. That's the revealed law, right? The discovered law is you run across the street and you get hit and you go, wait, I don't want to run across the street. So we want to learn through the revealed law, not the discovered law. But the discovered law is what gives us basis for why the revealed law is true, right? So that's what that's what I'm teaching the kids. I'm saying, look, we're gonna walk through and discover the law, and then I'm going to show you how the revealed law was pre-revealed for it. And then so kids are like, oh, okay. So now they're starting to trust the Bible, not because the Bible said so. The Bible said so. Well, the Bible said so, and here's why the Bible said so. So when you talk about homosexuality, that's the same thing.
Do you think, Neil, this is going over their head? Do you think they're grasping what you're saying?
Well, it works on my 4 or 5 and 6 year olds, right? And well, I think they're geniuses, but the reality is that they're probably just average kids. And it has worked. We've had moms come to us. I mean, again, before we released the book, we sent out a bunch of copies. We spread it out, and we had people giving us feedback. And we're still, in fact, we always review the book. So the front of the book says, if you find any errors, if something was more difficult, please tell us. Every book says that. And then we recommend parents take a picture of the page with their notes on it, send it to us, and then we'll revise it in the next one. Because the goal here is to iteratively, and the way our publisher works is I can change a copy today and it'll be available tomorrow, right? Amazing. So we, especially if you order it from Amazon or something, it'll be the copy you order on it will be laser. So you'll see, if you look at some of my older books, you'll see it says revision 17.3. It's been through a bunch of revisions because we're fixing it constantly, right? And so we want that to be the most effective book for parents. Get it, tell us what you think about it. We'll revise it. For the next person, but also we'll apply any lessons we learned to the next editions and stuff like that. So, but kids do learn. We've had. It's amazing how much kids know. In fact, a lot of times, I found kids grasp things easier than their parents because their parents are set in their ways and they're moving in one direction. Yet kids today are more able to grasp science. Let me give you a great example. Years ago, because I teach one of these things, we talk about multiple universes, right? So this is when we talk about how God created the universe, we talk about how the atheist tries to come back and says there is no God because there are infinite universes, right? That's one of their only excuses. But then we talk about how absurd these infinite universes is. Well, I used to have to take 10, 15 minutes to explain what infinite universes were. Well, today with the Marvel movies and comics and the multiverse and everything, I just say multiverse to the kid, and the kid knows far more than the parent about what I'm talking about. And then I'm like, just explain it to your parents, okay? And the parents like, what? I'm like, well, you see, there are all these alternate universes, and that's what he's talking about, So I think they definitely do get it, and if they don't, then we need to know that so we can modify it.
And I think what you did, like I did with my first book, I literally send out the manuscript to a bunch of different people to see what they thought. They send it back to me with their highlights, and pretty much everybody said the same thing. So I'm glad you're doing that, because what you're proving to parents right now is that you can teach your kids, take time to teach your kids, and they will grasp it, like homosexuality and transgenderism. Because the question is, and now parents that are watching, you can get, Neil's book, The Daily Apologetics for Kids, Volume 1, because it is out right now. Neil, we have to come to a close. Where can parents start getting your series, especially Series 1?
So the best place is when you look for Neil Mammen. So that's the easiest way. You'll get it in a couple of days.
Even though we'll have it up on the screen.
Yeah, NeilMammen. Yeah. Or you can go to, I don't know if you remember this, but it's A4K1.noblindfaith.com. If you can remember that, and that'll take you to the Amazon page. But we found out, that's the best way to get it out there, so people can get it overnight if they want it.
I have to tell my audience this before I come to a close. I was asking Neil how to pronounce his last name, and he says, like your mama and them, Hey, you couldn't end that on a better note. Those of you that are listening, please share this with somebody else, because so many parents out there are wondering, how do we share different things with our kids? And Neil explains that very well, that it can be taught to kids because he teaches kids apologetics. Get his book, get all series, all 12 of them when they come out. And Neil, do you have an email address in case someone wants to reach out to you?
Yes, real easy. Neil@noblindfaith.com. So Neil, Neil @noblindfaith.com.
And our faith remains in Jesus Christ. Neil, you are a blessing. Thank you so much for being on Healing Boynes. Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Acts 10:34 says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't play favorites, which means what he has done for Janet, what he has done for guests on this show, he will do for you too. If you are struggling with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. They will do their best to help you any way they can. Go to the website, janetboynesministries.com. Janet loves you, and most importantly, God loves you. Have a blessed day.